My parents were always pretty industrious, they were always doing stuff. My brothers used to tell my mother that if she had a factory, it would be overproductive, that they would have to stop it because she was always ordering everybody around to do something. But we had a farm, and we had a few animals. We had horses and stuff, and we, as kids, we moved a lot of rocks and a lot of wood, and also went to the city.
Oh, stop the world and let me on. I'm tired of going round and round. I have played the game of love and lost. So stop the world and let me on.
A lot of my work has been about, women's work that has been done traditionally by women, but I'm also very much a person who's very interested in labor. And, my parents used to tell me that, especially my father would say, Barb, really, they invented the wheel, they've already invented the wheel. Like, you don't have to carry that rock all the way from here to here. And I think that's one of the reasons that I like fresco so much, is because, I'm using this old traditional method, and it honors, all these people who have done manual labor before me. I just feel like it's a very inexhaustible subject. So I just think about things I want to make, and I make them. And then, then I think about them as my vocabulary for putting something larger together, because I often make these little components, and then I'll figure out some way to put them together in some scenario or some narration or something. I've been really thinking a lot about fire lately. And all my time, like sitting next to a stove and reading, and that kind of wood heat that's different than any other kind of heat, it's just different. And so I just thought, well, I'm going to make some wood stoves with fire in them. I took this job running the kitchen at the Skowhegan School of Sculpture and Painting, and I was the first artist cook that they had. And the director came down one day and said, would you like a studio? And I thought to myself, I don't know if I'll ever have any time to use it, but I started using it, and it was kind of this very small studio. It was really buggy. I made all these screen curtains and stuff, and it was really close to the fresco barn. And so I started hanging out with those guys a little bit at night after work, and I'd go up there to paint just to kind of unwind at the end of the day. And because I was, feeding a lot of people 3 times a day and stuff. And so anyway, they kept saying, you're a real physical person. You would really like this medium. And I thought, okay. So they got a panel ready for me, and I went up to paint it. It was totally different size than what they said. And so I just did this really fresh painting on it. And I love the immediacy of it, and just this pigment hitting this wet plaster. And so anyway, that's kind of how I never looked back, but I also did not want to work flat. I draw on plywood usually, or some kind of wood that's a substrate, and then I cut it out, and then I make an armature underneath out of wood that I glue up, and then I drape over it this architectural lath that has these little kind of cups in it, and it's galvanized steel. Then I put one coat of an Oricchio, which is the rough coat of plaster, on top. And then that has to set up for a couple days. And then I wet that, and then I add my ontonico on top of it, which is slaked lime and aggregate. And then my work is painted when it's wet. I like that it's immediate, in a way. And I think even when I was an oil painter, my paintings they weren't necessarily quick, but they were very gestural and not, they were certainly not trompe-l'oeil paintings, and they weren't, tight. They weren't tight. This is a painting that I actually painted with my left hand. I had a terrible bike accident where a dog pulled me off my bike by my hand, and I must have put my arm up like this to cover my face, and then he chewed on my arm for a while. It was quite an event. So one of my sisters had breast cancer, and so I went to the hospital, and I said, can I come in and have somebody film me getting a mammogram, and they said, no, you can't do that. So then I knew this education director at the hospital in Skowhegan, and I went to her and I said, I think this is like, I want to do a project about this. She said, well, I'm going to get you right in. So this guy that I was living with at the time came and he photographed me while I got a mammogram. And so I had all these mammogram paintings and stuff. And after cooking at Skowhegan for 8 summers, and I had been a painter, but I left art school and I never finished that. I met all these people who had gotten MFAs and stuff, and I thought, I think I'll get an MFA. But then I realized I had to finish my BA first. So Farmington was the closest place, and so I majored in creative writing and fine art there, and got a degree, and then I applied to Vermont, and then I went to Vermont College and got an MFA, but not until I was in my 40s. And after that, I just got a job right away at Farmington, and I taught there for 22 years. When you get an MFA, nobody really teaches you how to teach. And I had to start really thinking back to my own education about what was said to me and the methods that were used. And, and a lot of it I didn't really like. And it wasn't like I didn't like the critiques, because I thought the critiques were, good. But I did feel that, like there were never any female painters who were ever suggested to me. It was mostly men. For one thing, how they never mentioned like Alice Neal or somebody to me, I still can't figure that out. I didn't think about it at the time because I was just so hungry to make art that I just kept making it. And I didn't think about the sort of the lack of feminism and stuff until I was in grad school, and then I was teaching myself at UMF, and I just started thinking about what is really important to me and what do I want to impart to these people. And specifically, I would assign things that had many parts to them so that they would, maybe if they didn't engage in one part, they'd engage in 2 of the other parts so that they would understand what it's like to just, I would call it, being in the zone, when time doesn't mean anything and, solving the problem means more than time. So, I really enjoyed teaching. I felt like it was really a good venue to introduce people to all kinds of artists. And, drawing students used to say, you're going to make us look up artists? And I'm like, yeah, because, history is important. And you really need to, look at the work of other people because, I think the thing that's original is what makes you make something, not that you're being original necessarily. I don't really think there's original. I don't think there's original sin, and I don't think there's original art. There's this biennial at the Portland Museum, and I've been in a few of them, and people were all up in arms that it wasn't, it was some people with connection to Maine, not Mainers, and I didn't care. I think I like that influence from outside, that I think it makes you think harder and it makes you aspire to something that's different than you maybe would. So I think all those influences are really furtive and interesting and good fodder for people. But I don't feel particularly territorial about Maine, I certainly remember like the old Maine, and Maine is, in some ways so much like other places now, but there's still like some kind of underlying core that is still Maine to me. But I do think that I welcome some of those changes, But on the other hand, I do feel like I don't necessarily want just a Maine to just be bought up by anybody who has a lot of money either, So I felt like, I was kind of in both camps in a way. I don't think I'm necessarily a workaholic. I can kick back with the best of them, but I just I find it satisfying. Yeah, I work every day pretty much doing something, you know. I wrote this grant one time, and I realized I had this big gap in my work, you know, like it was like, I don't know, like a few years or something, you know, several years. And I realized that painting was the thing I thought about during that. It was when we were building our house and stuff. And I just had no time to physically paint, but it was the thing I thought about the most. And I thought about getting back to it. And so, and I've also gone through little hiatuses like that where I felt that it takes so long to get back into it. You know, every day you put it off and you don't do it, and you know, and so now I've decided it's just easier to stay in the game and just do something every day.